IVM.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of All Things Policy. My name is Satya and I am a research analyst working on semiconductor geopolitics at the Takshashila Institution. I know it has been quite some time, but we are back with yet another Siliconpolitik episode, which is our limited series on semiconductors, geopolitics, and India's chipmaking ambitions. Just to jog everyone's memory, previous episodes have focused on areas such as how trade policy crafts semiconductor ecosystems, the geopolitics and geoeconomics of the global chip value chain, and what exactly goes into fabricating a chip. Today, we are going to be delving into the chip design stage of that value chain, something that India has traditionally been considered to be very strong at. With me today is G S Madhusudan, CEO of InCore Semiconductors, India's first processor IP company. He has over 30 years of startup experience and extensive domain knowledge on the regulatory, financial, and geopolitical aspects of this value chain. He was also a senior project advisor for the Shakti microprocessor program at IIT Madras. Thank you so much for joining us today. It is great having you here.
Yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So starting right off the bat, we have previously outlined the different stages of the chip value chain in this podcast series before, namely design, fabrication, and final testing and packaging. Now, we have seen government programs under the Indian Semiconductor Mission focus on things like the design-linked incentives for chips in an effort to bolster this segment as well. And the generally accepted premise is that around 20% or so of the world's chip design talent works in India. Now, what we don't have a clear idea so far is about the structure of this Indian chip design ecosystem and what part of it, what part of the global ecosystem does Indian talent occupy? As someone who's worked in this space before, what kind of market players do you also see? So if I could direct these two questions at you, Mr. Madhusudan.
Yeah, I would like to shed some light on the entire value chain of a chip design, right? So a lot of words get bandied about without realizing what happens at each stage.
Yeah.
A chip is a product. So like any product, it starts at a conceptualization stage. It can be an iPhone, it can be an iPod, it can be a laptop, whatever. So typically that conceptualization never happens in India, apart from a very handful of small companies. Most of the conceptualization happens in the US or Europe. Actually, very little happens in Japan or Korea or Taiwan, apart from the 2, 3 big companies over there. The product companies are predominantly Western, right? With a smattering of Korean companies, like the Koreans are good at memory, Samsung does other chips also. Japan had a great industry, but it has been reduced pretty much to one company, Renesas, right? There's a resurgence coming back. Taiwan is known for very low-end chips, but typically they fabricate for other people. It's not a lack of talent. That's how the industry has been organized. So the maximum value goes to the person who owns the concept and gets the product out. It is actually a US domination. If you look at all the major ones, right? AMD, Intel, Broadcom, Nvidia, Apple does its own chip. There's a handful of companies in Europe, NXP, ST, all of that, but typically in the embedded space and stuff. If you want the big Tagada chips, they're all American. So the Americans literally control, 80-85% of the market or something like that. Texas Instruments, Analog Devices, anything you name is. And most of the EDA companies, the chip design tools also are American. Mentor is American, got bought by Siemens. It's owned by a German company, but for all practical purposes, it's an American company. So the Americans not only own the concept creation, they also own the tooling that drives the chips. Once you've done a concept, then you break the concept into constituent parts. Various intellectual property blocks have to be procured. There again, it was fundamentally an American and a European monopoly, with a fair amount coming from Asia also. India never figured greatly in that game too. But off late, there are companies like Smart DV and also companies like partners of ours like Tesol or HP have started creating IP for other customers. I mean, they have the ability to create an IP, but they kind of chose to use to choose a services model for business reasons, but they can create the IP if they want. They have the knowledge, right? So typically the IP tends to be in digital block, or it tends to be RF like amplifiers, or it tends to be analog sensors and all of that, MEMS. So a whole bunch of IP that gets involved. So once you've done a concept, then you take a bunch of IP, put it together. Till now, what has been happening when you talk about Indian design talent is the idea comes from outside, the IP comes from outside. So any company, a startup or a large company, basically decides, okay, this is the product that I'm going to build, and these are the IP blocks. That is when the Indian value chain kicks in. So we're not involved in the conceptualization, we're not involved in the IP creation till now. It's changing, but till now that has been there. Once the broad architecture is done, then the Indian companies took over, basically executed it, and typically took it all the way to what is called GDS2, which is basically the file that you give to the foundry.
So
Then
taping out so at the point of taping out is where the Indian companies take it. Okay.
Yeah. So so the high level architecture gets frozen, the IP blocks get selected. Then the Indian companies essentially implement it completely and hand over to the foundry. Once you hand over to the foundry, you have to come back for what's called post-silicon testing, chip testing, and all of that. There again, India does a lot, but very few companies do it. So again, Tessol was one of the first companies to get into chip testing. Now HCL does it. Other people are trying, right? OSAT is also coming. So the post-silicon is starting to becoming an Indian strength, but we still have a long way to go. There are only 2-3 companies around that do it, and we work with two, right? But we work with Tessol, we work with HCL. I'm pretty sure there are a few other companies around, but these are the two that are well known in the industry. So it's like a bell curve, right? It's very thin at the beginning, and only when the design starts, the Indian companies. So the 20 to 40% that you're talking about is between design start to GDS2 and any associated embedded software. Once the silicon tapes out, the Indian capability thins out because putting testers and all that involves a lot of capital. And then coordinating manufacturing, where some companies are starting to do, again, HCL does it, Tessol does it, I believe Cyient does it. There, what happens is the Indian company also tells the foreign customer, look, I'll handle coordination of your manufacturing with TSMC or UMC. So they work with the foundry to make sure the yield is there, all of that, right? So coordination of manufacturing is becoming an Indian strength. So Indian companies are good. And this has been happening only the past 2 or 3 years, not more than that. This is a post-2020 phenomena. So now Indian companies are saying, look, I'll take a turnkey. You conceive the product, but I'll make sure the product gets designed, manufactured, and I'll coordinate the delivery. So we are starting to own most of the process. The missing pieces were the IP blocks and the product conceptualization. And of course, the foundry, which we don't have, apart from a test foundry, a small foundry at SCL. OSAT is another thing that is starting to come. The Micron plant is captive. That will not add value to India. But the one the Murugappa group announced, the Keynes has announced and all that, the ones that are coming in, mostly I think coming in the south of India, those will add Indian capability. See, if you take a $10 embedded chip, the foundry cost is probably about $1.50. The remaining $8.50 is IP, design, architecture, packaging. So if we get packaging, we can actually, at least in the embedded space, you can capture 70-80% of the value without investing in foundries. And this is a fact that people don't seem to realize, saying that, look, let the foundries come, they'll come at their own pace. But you can focus on 80% value. Why do you want 100% of the value from day one?
Exactly. This is also something that we have been noticing from all the success stories that we've seen till date. Taiwan, Japan, and Korea is basically packaging and all this, what is considered to be the unglamorous part of the value chain. They started off, they began developing capability, they got transfer technology, and then they began to branch out and specialize. And that is also something that is the kind of proven avenue to getting to the leading edge, the glamorous part of it, right?
No. See, when you don't have an ecosystem, you have to crawl before you can walk, and you have to walk before you can run. I mean, we said we go for a 7-nanometer foundry, and then found out that nobody wanted to put a 7-nanometer foundry or willing to sell the tech. And the US is going to spend an aggregate of nearly $200 billion in subsidies and other supports and all that. Direct support is 50-60 billion or so, right? So it will come. You can't match that kind of money. Israel itself is giving $3.5 billion for a chota country.
Yeah.
It's very political. The new Israel Intel fabs that are going to come are very close to the Gaza Strip.
Yeah.
Last place on
Kiryat Gat, yeah. It's very difficult.
No, but it's a political play, right? Because Israel wants to show and all that. And so that's between Intel and all that. Taiwan has got this whole China thing. I think the Chinese threat is, I think, overblown beyond a particular point. But from a geopolitical, yeah, you still want to. I jokingly say, look, the best thing you can do to Taiwan is South Tamil Nadu, 5,000 square kilometers leased to Taiwan, just like we did for Hong Kong, right? Right?
Yeah, I mean,
Just hand it over to
might
them.
work. Yeah,
It might work.
it might be the one thing that tips over the negotiation block that is going on between India and Taiwan in the FTAs. That might that might tip the thing over.
I mean, you don't have to do the Hong Kong thing. You can basically say it's an enhanced SEZ, where all over right. You build an airport, you put a port over there, and they control it, and zero tax, whatever, right? Zero tax in Taiwan also. Let it be tax free. Everybody will come running because we have the talent and stuff. Geopolitically, it's southern Tamil Nadu is as stable as it gets. Correct.
So, just taking you a slightly like a couple of minutes back, you did mention that conceptualization and IP blocks are not something that the Indian design talent occupies as a niche. Now, and so when most people talk about design being India's prowess, and AMD, for instance, is starting its largest design center. It's starting work on its largest design center in Bangalore right now. A lot of other design companies, like Intel, etc., have their design companies based out of India. So, do these companies also work only in the space that comes after the conceptualization and IP blocks, or do they also have?
A lot of IP blocks is created in these companies in India. But I am not aware of. Intel has got a processor research lab here, AMD has. So some cutting edge research is happening. But by and large, the conceptualization still happens in the US. So if you take the core, the next ultra core that came from Intel and all that, I'm pretty sure most of the work would have been done out of Oregon, a bit in the valley, and some in Israel, I think. It still doesn't happen in India. So what will happen is the first product will get built. So somebody told me in Qualcomm, the first part gets built in San Diego. Then the subsequent variants will get built here. But the core processor architecture team, if you take Intel AMD, that is the real IP, right? The vast majority is still outside India. That doesn't come here.
So even if so let's pick the big players out, Intel and AMD all out of the scene. Even we're talking about, let's say, our more risk-based processor design, like design-based companies in India, even there, do we see a majority of the IP that is being generated in the hands of foreign companies, so to speak, to simplify it? Because I know a lot of startups also got bought up by, let's say, Renesas, like you said, from Japan. They came in and took a. Yeah. I remember last year they bought a few companies, one of them being in India. So do we end up seeing?
So typically processor design doesn't happen in India. Intel has got a processor research lab where an old friend of mine, Shankar, who's a prof at IIT, I know works there. They do some research over there. ARM, I don't think, does some of the work there, but the main work still happens in UK. I know for a fact that a RISC-V startup started thinking of doing design here, but they still do only verifications of the core design still gets done in the US. See, because your CPU architecture team is pretty small, it is not something that is cost sensitive because you don't need too many people. So you can't do cost arbitrage.
So comparative advantage is already set in stone.
You just need the best brains. Price be damned. That's how CPU architecture works, right? We'll know. So that is why InCore is unique in that we actually do processor architecture in India, in Chennai and Bangalore. We have a small office in Bangalore, the major office is there. And more importantly, this is probably one of the few or probably the only company in the world where a fresher can do CPU architecture.
Yeah, I mean, that is one of the selling points of having a RISC-V based design. Yeah.
No. Not just because of RISC-V. Very few companies allow a fresher to do processor architecture.
So you allow
freshers. It's not that my main architects are freshers, but yeah. A fresher joins after 6 months of training, has a decent chance of doing processor architecture. That doesn't happen in other RISC-V startups.
That's interesting. So on the basis of that, could you, now that we know what niche the Indian design talent occupies?
Let me come back. There's a key point to be made there, right? Now, product conceptualization, the problem is there's a lack of good product marketing folks in India. It's next to impossible to hire a good VP of marketing. I mean, look at the Indian electronics market in general, not just chips. How many homegrown brands that you see are desirable brands?
Yeah, I don't see any marketing whatsoever. Like I have to search for it very specifically if I want to learn more about.
I mean, boat has come in, noise has come in, right? But they're not category leaders yet. They're volume leaders in some respects. Right? They'll get there. The problem they have is even if they want to dream big, it's tough to get good product visionaries. You need an ecosystem. So the MNCs who are here till now basically created design engineers who worked on designs conceptualized outside. Right. So we have created an army of design talent, which if you give them a concept, will implement it great. So that is the Indian strength. InCore and other companies, obviously we're not the only one, are now getting into products where we are conceiving the product saying this is the product that should go into the market. So for me to build our marketing team took some time to find the right talent. It requires a certain degree of arrogance to say that I'm right, this product is going to sell. You can't do customer surveys and stuff. Expecting a customer to know what product he'll need 5 years down the line, not going to work. Conceptualizing a product is an act of faith. And you need confidence like nothing.
And we can't just like rely on expertise. Like that experience has to be cultivated over a bunch of years. That's something. So a lot of the existing literature on what India should be doing, etc., to bolster chip design, also doesn't look at this ancillary industries, ancillary like what do you call it? What supporting services that go into creating successful stuff.
You know why? Because most people who talk about these things should not be talking about it in the first place. Unless you have created a product from scratch and taken through 2-3 generations, you won't get it. You simply won't get it. There's nothing special about electronics. It's the same as doing. We have the talent. We do it in two-wheelers. We are world leaders, right? We do it in garments. We do it in whiskeys. An Indian whiskey just won it, right? So it's not as if Indians can't do it. For some reason, in my sector, we have decided we'll service other people.
And now then there are knee-jerk reactions to like, oh, there's a dependency on XYZ, so we should do everything. And then we essentially squander state capacity. But
Yeah. At the very least, I'm hoping there are companies like Smart DV, which I should call out, a privately owned company, but it's one of the largest IP providers, right? So at the very least, Indian companies should start doing the IP so that if you come up with a concept, I can put the IP together. Foreign IP is extremely expensive, correct? So even if you think of a chip, you need a processor, you need a bus, then you need USB, Ethernet and all of that, right? So most of the chip is actually all these peripheral IPs. So if Indians can at least get all those peripheral IPs, you can cut down the cost of IP acquisition by something like 60-70%.
Yeah. So which is why open source hardware is such a burning topic, right?
No, what happened?
No, just don't have.
I almost bet everything on it, and it's probably the only prediction I ever made in my life that was complete dud zero. Turns out hardware is very tough to do, and very few people want to muck around with hardware. I mean, you can put an open source hardware. The problem is nobody contributes, so the company promoting it has to do all the time. Why should a company put all its own efforts and release it free, right? They'll go bankrupt.
Yeah. And so it ends up being proprietary anyway. So now that we have talked about the potential problems faced by Indian design companies when there is no forward or backward linkages to say EDA tools, electronic design automation tools, or then foundry services. Foundry services are not a huge problem as of now for design focused companies only. So what goes into designing a chip? Could you just give us a 30,000 feet view, like a very broad overview?
Well, if you take a design, say, let me give you something, right? Let me give an example that people, take a smartphone, correct? Something that everybody relates to. So a smartphone basically has a main processor. But what does the processor do? You have a modem. The modem basically handles the communication, correct? Then you got the graphics. So there's a separate graphics processor which does all the fancy graphics, 2D, 3D. Right? Then you got an audio processor, all your fancy voice and all of that. Then you have your peripheral. So typically in a smartphone chip, you have a set of processors, the main processor. You would have seen an octa-core, a 6-core, or 4-core. They're just different processing power. That's all right. Let's not get into detail. So you have to put a cluster of regular processors. Then these days you also put an AI/ML processor to accelerate that kind of workload. Right? Then you put a graphics processor. You also put a video processor for decoding and encoding video, right? For capturing video and for playing back video. You put an audio processor. And that tends to be a security processor also. So there are basically about 6 types of processors that get put in. So the architecture essentially is, then you've got a bus. But bus essentially is a fabric that connects all of these together. So the challenge of the architecture is how do you put all together? What is the topology of the bus? Who talks to what? How many memory channels do you need to put in? So if the AI/ML is also doing some processing, the main processor doing some processing, how much of the memory bandwidth should you allocate to this, to that? Can it dynamically change? If both are doing simultaneously, who do you give priority? If networking traffic comes in, how do you prioritize and all of that, right? So it's a set of activities that are happening, and the challenge of the architect is to balance all of that. At the same time, maintaining the power balance, which is tough. And the modem is really tough, right? Apple has been struggling and they've spent a few $1 billion.
They acquired so many. I think you acquired a bunch of startups to create their own modem, and now they've gone back to Qualcomm or ARM for this.
They're still going with a Qualcomm. They keep threading Qualcomm and all that. They will get it, but it's not as easy a problem. And Qualcomm acquired most of the remaining companies, and Qualcomm is an excellent company when it comes to modem design and stuff and all that, right? So not easy to beat Qualcomm. Even for a company like Apple, they're not able to beat Qualcomm. So you realize how good Qualcomm is, right? So this degree of IP expertise is what we should be getting. So we'll say we'll create a 5G modem company. It's not that easy to. Like if Apple with its billions struggled for 5 years.
And Huawei took Huawei around 4 years to, bounce back from the sanctions from 2019. And Huawei and Qualcomm and one other company has the only.
Yeah, Samsung does its own modems, right? And does it fairly successfully. Because what people forget is Samsung has got a huge 5G network.
It was a monopoly in Korea.
Business.
Pretty much.
Right? So they have enough 5G expertise and all of that. And so that is there. Apple, interestingly, is struggling in one more area also, right? They're not able to retain their CPU architects. See, the problem for a company that is captive is, okay, you've designed one CPU, and Apple doesn't want to keep changing CPUs every 6 months. Whereas a Qualcomm will be releasing one every 2-3 months, Intel, all that, right? So because they're catering to multiple customers, they can keep the CPU architects occupied. Just throwing money at the problem will not help. They'll get bored. So even Apple is discovering that unless you're doing 10, 20, 30 different CPU parts, your CPU architects will get bored, quit, and go to other.
Yeah, I mean, we saw that with.
If Apple is not able to retain talent, can you imagine the problem for?
We saw that with Intel and AMD during the early mid 2010s as well, right? Raja Koduri and all, they'll go back, create a blockbuster architecture, and then leave and do something else. And I think that's a good way.
No, it depends. If you look at the IBM Power architects, they're some of the best in the world, by the way. The IBM has got 2 lines which I greatly admire. One is the Power 10, Power 11. The other one, which is even more esoteric, is their mainframe, the Z15 and stuff. I think the gentleman's name is Derek Jacobi is his last name. I forget his first name. Superb architect. Very, very few people know about him. But he designs one of the most complex processors on the planet because that mainframe processor can run something like 6,000 or 8,000 Linux instances virtual simultaneously.
I was completely unaware of this. That sounds interesting as well.
Right. And you're talking 5 nines reliability and stuff. To me, because I'm an enterprise big iron guy, right? That is the holy grail. So if you really want to know who one of the top architects is, look at the guy who designs the IBM mainframe chips. It's a superb piece of design. It can't crash, correct? And IBM still sells mainframes for this reason. It's ultra reliable.
So what would a chip? So like you mentioned, what the chief chip architect's job is, but what goes into designing a chip like a
So somebody has got to design the architecture, right? You got to simulate and all of that. That expertise is not there in India.
That is the primary hurdle for
conceptualizing a product. We are starting to do embedded. So embedded, well, let me be very frank, right? ARM gives you a lot of cookie cutter templates. Designing an ARM-based processor is like a kid's coloring book. It's like a Lego. And now ARM has also started giving standard templates. You pick a template and they give you a piece of software, you tune it and all. There's not much architecture job left. You really can't do much with an ARM design because the number of memory channels, how you connect, all of that they tell you how to do. So it's not like you do from scratch. So if you're going to do an ARM-based design, you probably don't need great architects because ARM has done a lot of the job for you. But that still, the fact still remains that we need more architecture people in India. And InCore is grooming people. I'm pretty sure other companies are. We will get it. It's not rocket science. It's just a matter of getting the expertise,
How
right? It's not that Indians are not capable or some nonsense like that. It's just that we simply did not have the occasion to do so. And we do it for 5 years.
Stay tuned to All Things Policy. We'll be right back after a short commercial break.
so how would you say the restriction as regards electronic design automation tools affects processor design, like chip design, generally speaking? Like when I say restriction, I mean like only being logged into a market with only three providers. So is that something that features heavily as a potential hurdle?
No, see, remember, chip design is expensive business, right? It's not a place like in software where you experiment a lot. So you need stable software that gives you guaranteed results. That is why there are only three major players. But the fact that there are only three players I'm not saying it's a monopoly situation. A little more choice would be nice. They don't let you share data. So people are trying to create open flows where I can pick one from Cadence, one from Mentor, right? I do the flow, but I can pick it the tools. These guys don't really encourage that because obviously they kind of lose a lock-in, right? So you tend to have a synopsis flow or a cadence flow and stuff. I would like a little more openness in that, but I wouldn't call it a monopoly. Hey, look at their turnover and their profits and all of that, right? It's not as if it's like a NVIDIA
it's
type
not
profit, right?
super normal profits.
Yeah. So blame. So there is a tendency to say, "Hey, these guys got a monopoly. They're milking money." I look at their balance sheet. The problem is it's an area where not too many.
It's difficult to break in, and it's difficult to have.
No, the number of buyers are limited. It's a captive audience, right? So because the market is limited, price will be high. The price is not high necessarily because only 2-3 companies do it, right? The price is also high because it's a small market. And a lot has to be done as you go thing, right? So the EDA tool, see, fundamentally, when you do a 7 nanometer tape out or something, correct? You're not going to, the tool is not the deal breaker, nor is the ARM license. There are a lot of other things that come into the design, into the picture, into the IP, and all of that, right? So my gut feel is if you design an embedded tool of a processor, a typical embedded processor design is probably about $6-7 million going to a tape out. That's what you should budget. You should budget $7 million, right? Out of that, your tooling cost, depending on how much you can bargain and stuff, you're probably talking, I don't know, a million or so, or slightly less than that, slightly more than that types, right? So the tooling is probably about 15% of your cost in an embedded. As you go higher up, yeah, probably will change and all of that. So it's not a deal breaker.
Right. Because I'm asking this because a lot of focus has been directed towards, again, open source EDA tooling, right? The European.
That is coming, but that promise has been there. The French effort called Alliance, and I remember playing around with it in 1995. But finally, what's happening? Google is pushing it, and we are starting to see that in 180, 130 nanometer, or 90 nanometer. Once it hits 65 nanometers, 45, and possibly 28, then all hell will break loose.
Yeah, once it.
Most of the world still is on the old nodes. You chip in a calling bell or a tiny little thing. It needs to be just 180, 130, max 90. A lot of the chips, automotive chips, are happy on 40.
Right, yeah, and that's where.
If you got a lot of computing, yeah, they come to 25 to 16, 14, 12, and ADAS chips come to 7, 5, 3, and all of that, right? Those are specialized. But if you look at that little chip that controls your mirror or that moves your seat backward and forward, those are still happy at 180, 130, 90.
That's also something, that question is also something we discussed when we were recording the episode on India's semiconductor ambitions, is where policy focus should lie. And on that note, let's bring the conversation to what do you think the policy focus should be? Not necessarily looking at India's semiconductor mission, but is the impetus for bolstering chip design narrower or broader than it should be? Like,
it should be narrower. I mean, I keep telling Matey every other day, so there's nothing new here. See, we need to get tactical first before we get strategic. So what we're telling MAD is look at the standard chips that are selling. Electricity meter is supposed to be 250 million chips. Smart cards for both for banking, for passports and all that. Correct? IP camera chips. There are like about 6 or 7 chips which you have identified. We have written a report. Everybody knows about it. Okay. You take these 4 or 5 chips and you put a mission saying, look, by 2026, 2027, each of these categories, I want to see Indian chips selling at the volume of 5 million per year.
Very, very specific targets to meet, target thresholds.
Yeah. 5 million per chip, 5 chips, 25 million. Come hell or high water, by the end of 2027, India needs to be shipping 25 or a stretch.
Regardless of local or export
on these things.
Consumption, it doesn't matter. Yeah.
Doesn't matter. The design has to be Indian. The IP has to be 70-80% Indian. See, at the lower end, all IP is Indian now. InCore kind of completed the picture because the processor was not available. You can also get from CDAC. CDAC has got an open thing. There's an open source from IIT also, right? But we are the only commercial vendor in the country. So we give embedded cores till about a gigahertz now, 500, 600. We have some more that are coming, which will hit 1.5 to 2 possibly at the high end. But for embedded, they'll probably stop at 1.5, right? So this is equivalent to what you call a Cortex A55. The big, little, and a typical thing. This is the little is not so little.
It's the primary.
It is actually a pretty tagda little, right? So in terms of processor, for pretty much all that we consume in mass market, we have local. We have got things like Ethernet, PCI Express, DDR, USB, MIPI, anything you think of. What India doesn't have are basically 2 things. We don't have GPU, which we are forced to license from elsewhere. InCore plans to do it at some point of time in future because RISC-V is coming with the GPU ISA.
Interesting.
Right? Once
I haven't
that happens,
seen much about it yet.
That's it's very low-key. It's happening slowly. There are other things to do, so it's not really priority for anybody. So that will happen. We don't have too many of the video codecs. There are 1 or 2 players, but that we need to ramp up over there. AI/ML accelerators, we have vector and all of that in the works. We'll get some vector by the end of the year. That I think we got covered. So GPU and modem are my primary concerns. Right. Other than that, for the low-cost chips, when I'm talking about these 5, 6 chips, they're all chips selling between 55 cents to about $2 or $3, right? All the IP is available in India. It's not a problem. So IP becomes 100%. The design conceptualized India. The tape-out process, everything happens in India. By the time OSAT will be there. So out of a $10 part, $8 you can capture locally by 2026, 2027.
So the downstream linkages will basically be there by the time you develop these areas of the design system.
So what we need to do is we need to do hyper-tactical. So Tamil Nadu government is coming out with the semiconductor policy. I said the same thing, right? Get hyper-tactical, right? Get a few parts out. See, there's no capability problem in India, but because you're not taping out chips, everybody is asking whether you can do it or not. We just need 2, 3 success stories and people will stop asking the questions whether India can do it, right? Of course we can do it. This is nothing. It's just... So there's no reason why we should not have moved up the value chain earlier. Right? It's not a capability issue. We simply never got around to it. I guess culturally we are not restricted.
Also, just policy focus was very mismatched over, I would say, 45 to 50 years.
Oh, come on, yaar. See, I hate it when people blame the government and blame
it's not the government. It's just that it is mismatched. What the private industry wanted was something the government may not have kept in mind.
How much of cash is sloshing around in this country? It takes $7 million to launch a chip. Production is you probably need you need to pay a TSMC advance of some 250,000 or 500,000 depending on how many wafers you order, right? So you got to burn 10 million. Are you telling me there are not enough people who can take a gamble on $10 million in this country?
I would not know, but judging from what I've seen so far, and it's just that there's a mismatch. It's not the sense that people didn't want to take risks, but the government said, okay, maybe the private market will sort it out. The private market is like, without government intervention, we can't do this. And
why do we have to keep relying on the government for everything? That's true. See, as a startup, yeah, because IP, I need help, right? But somebody like the L&T, Tatas, right? Now, I shall not name, but one of the big service companies is taking a risk, putting its own money. They're spending a lot of money making their own parts. So it's happening. The market is there. They can do it. It's like we have got into the habit of saying our government policy. This is not the 60s and 70s here. There's no license Raj on chips or something like that.
Yeah, that's
See, if you fabricate a part, okay, you take a gamble, you get a part out. Once you have a part in the hand, go to Matey and say that, look, give me subsidies on this part and make sure this part gets priority. The government, I can assure you, Vaishnav or Rajiv, will help you within the next 5 minutes. The private sector doesn't want to take the risk. You can't hide behind the government's sari pallu forever, right? We need to go on our own. We have the money, we have the talent. I don't know.
no. So when I said
I mean, we take the gamble in motorbikes. Did Bajaj ask for government help when it developed Pulsar?
no, it is purely it is very very original. Yeah.
Or did Tata ask for government help when it did Nexon EV or the Safari? Did Mahindra ask for help in the XUV 700, a world-class product? Why is it that in this sector alone that we have to keep running behind the government saying policy?
No, when I
policy,
said
policy?
mismatch, I meant in the sense that either the government or private industry has been looking at the wrong places to focus on. Like you said, like we'll go to the leading edge nodes based chips, and then they'll figure out, okay, we maybe don't have the capacity for that. So at one point, maybe it's the private industry. At one point, maybe it's the government, and so policy efforts have ever mismatch, which we are seeing now becoming more comprehensive and more targeted, and it needs to go forward. But yeah,
No, the simplest thing that private sector needs to do is look. Our procurement of electricity meter chips is supposed to be 250 million next 5 years, which is a lot. The private sector should simply tell the government, look, we will develop it. But if I develop a chip, I better get priority.
right, okay,
Priority. I will match the foreign chip for quality and price. Okay. You guarantee me volumes in terms of procurement because just give me a preference. Don't say that you can't buy foreign. Saying that between two foreign and the local one, as the local one should be given preference.
and that's a whole rabbit hole when you go towards procurement policies for government. But that's also one of the ways.
Then you run into trouble at WTO and all of that, right? So then, but even there, see, I'm not like ultra nationalist saying you should kick the foreigners out. I keep telling all the foreign vendors also, look, you can't expect that 1.4 billion people will consume only foreign chips. Be reasonable, right? Realistically, start with 30% Indian, 70% foreign. And long term, it will move to 60, 70% Indian, 30, 40%.
There are many ways to ensure that, foreign technology transfer or foreign upskilling of Indian talent happens over this.
No. I'm not even talking about technology transfer and stuff like that, right? I'm simply saying in a large market, typically, majority of the production would be local and they would be significant. Look, what is happening in cars? We don't put any embargo on Mercedes-Benz or BMW. Or they say luxury cars sell very well in the market. Have you ever seen a backlash in this country saying, hey, don't against Mercedes, BMW? No. They happily coexist. Why can't that be with chips? Why can't Indian companies and foreign companies coexist? Why does it have to be one or the other? We don't have to go ultranational and say kick the foreigners out. At the same time, we don't say that, look, we are a third world country, we should do chips, right? In this country, everything becomes extremes here.
Yeah,
the Buddhist middle way is our culture.
It's also something I've seen so far is that there is also not a clear policy focus in figuring out, okay, we are making XYZ for local consumption and we're making ABC for export markets. And it's kind of diverged along the way somehow. So I think that's also probably one of the things. But okay, so let's move on to the next area in the podcast, which is there has been a renewed focus on RISC-V as the new geopolitical battleground after US sanctions on China. A lot of senators and congressmen in the US have been talking about this. Now, RISC-V, as we know, is an open source instruction set architecture. For our listeners who don't know what it is, which is a set of basic instructions and functions that allows companies to develop microprocessors based on this specification. Now, unlike proprietary ISAs, like those developed by ARM or Intel, which is x86, for instance, having anyone design chips without licensing fees or intellectual property restrictions is huge. Now, so which is why consequently it's become the go-to technology for any nations aspiring to reduce dependency on costly chip technologies or foster homegrown semiconductor industries. I mean, Shakti grew from that kind of vision as well. So could you provide an overview of what makes RISC-V the ISF choice for so many design firms globally, not just in India, working in sectors ranging from embedded Internet of Things devices to like straight up AI workloads?
No, see, conceptually, when RISC-V started, it's not any better than ARM or MIPS, right? Let's not create myths about. I mean, we were one of the founding members of the consortium. I'm not speaking on behalf of the consortium, but I would like to set the record straight. We shouldn't make tall claims. It's one more ISA. That's all. But the fact it is open. See, an ISA is a combination of alphabet plus grammar. So if you want to write a great novel, can you imagine paying license fee to use that alphabet and the grammar? That's essentially what existed till now. So RISC-V opens it up, and it's not just the ISA, right? It's the ecosystem that goes along with the ISA. And where RISC-V's strength is, say, compared to ARM, ARM has got some of the best CPU architects on the planet and stuff. I would never ever dismiss ARM from a technical perspective. But what RISC-V offers is, for example, I need to do a graphics extension to RISC-V. Three guys sitting out of India or France or someplace can just do that extension on their own. Inside ARM, if you want to add a new thing, you have to make a business case for it because it's a commercial company, right? Somebody has got to pay for that. So it is not an ARM capability issue. Inherently, in any commercial entity, if you want to try something new, there needs to be a business justification. There's only so much of blue sky.
Incentive issue instead of
incentive issue, right? So RISC-V, what happens is it's a platform that allows other people to extend it, and so now it is mushrooming rapidly. So till recently, it was catching up with ARM, but I think in 2024, it is going to race ahead of ARM in a lot of extension areas. I don't think ARM will be able to catch up. But if ARM also opens up the ISA, then all hell breaks loose, right? So I don't know what's going to happen. I'm not in the prediction business. But so it's a sheer flexibility, the ease of licensing, all of that makes RISC-V easier.
So,
and inherently, even though ARM really doesn't play hardball, right? I mean, the licensing terms and stuff are big legal documents, but that goes with any public thing. The fact that you have to deal with a big legal thing, people will say that, look, what happens if ARM disappears or gets bought out or stuff, right? There's a lot of what if scenarios. That makes people.
That's actually one of the legal arguments that was produced before the UK CMA, I think, when the NVIDIA acquisition of ARM was supposed to be happening like a few years ago, is that ARM is very so much. What happens if ARM disappears? And there's also like cultural connotations of the UK's control over ARM, even though ARM is owned by SoftBank. That's a whole thing. Yeah, that's interesting.
No, see, the thing is, gradually over a period of time, I think RISC-V will pan out, and I don't know what ARM's future is going to be like. I can't figure out a place for ARM over a, say, 20-year period. But that's a long time away, right? In the interim, yeah, RISC-V is going to get some market share. ARM is going to get some. What percentage? Who? Don't ask me. Correct? Because that also depends on how people jump to RISC-V. So Qualcomm has jumped to RISC-V for its wearables, right? I think they'll. So I'm just waiting for. So we are starting to provide lower end processors, but we're also looking at see what the smartphone trends is. Google now supports RISC-V, right? So if Google supports RISC-V significantly and launches one chip with RISC-V, then all hell breaks loose.
Yeah, that's.
So you just need 2-3 inflection points and the market can change dramatically. So I don't know whether those inflection points are going to come because it depends on individual companies. That's completely unpredictable.
Is that why you think the Chinese push towards creating a whole cornucopia of companies focused only on RISC-V development can provide that?
No, you should remember the Chinese have been playing around with various ISAs, including MIPS clones for a long time, right? Long Soon and all of that. Look, the Chinese have excellent capability in developing their own ISA. A lot of the RISC-V development, especially the support verification, happens out of China, right? So the Chinese are excellent. And I don't know whether you know, I think pretty much 100% of the Wi-Fi, Bluetooth support that's there in your AC, fridge, and all that. From all that I could see, that market is 100% Chinese RISC-V now.
Like we can go down the audit trail and find out almost all of it is originating from Chinese companies or like Chinese.
I think if you take IP cameras, all of these sub $2 chips, they're all Chinese chips. First of all, it's 100% Chinese. None of them are ARM. They're either proprietary Chinese or Chinese RISC-V. All the Wi-Fi, Bluetooth is all Chinese RISC-V.
Interesting.
So we are talking about what ARM will do. I'm pointing to a scenario where 1.4 billion people are completely dependent on Chinese RISC-V today.
Interesting. That's wow. Okay.
So RISC-V eliminated ARM from the Indian market at that segment and eliminated every other company in the world with the.
This brings us to a very interesting question. This is something also I've been working on. Is that chip-based hardware backdoors or board-based hardware backdoors is something that is beginning to not beginning to either. It's been in the news for quite some time since Bloomberg reported in 2018. Yeah,
the security risk is horrible. See, I don't like to paint China as a. I mean, strategically, yeah, they're an issue with India. We deal with them. I work with the government. It's part of my job to help the government counter the Chinese tech and all of that, right? But it does not help anybody to demonize them, right? They're an issue. They're an issue in certain respects, and it is best left to our External Affairs Ministry and some critical ministries to deal with them. The general public talking about China in one way or the other does not help our interaction with them. Kind of trust the government, at least, right? In that. Governments can mess up and stuff, but the public demonizing China does not help in our dealing with them. Now, so we're not accusing anybody currently, saying there's a backdoor and all that, right? That is unfair. But the point is, all your critical infra, which is, see, all your BLDC fans now are running on Chinese chips. So your fans run on Chinese chips. Your Wi-Fi control for that runs on Chinese. Your entire home automation now runs on a whole bunch of Chinese wireless chips.
Right.
For me, even to audit that becomes a problem. I'm not saying that the Chinese have put in a backdoor and stuff.
Still is market, yeah.
It doesn't make sense for them to put too many backdoors because if too many backdoors are discovered, they lose the market, right?
The fact that backdoors already exist, it's just that the trust and verification mechanism, there is no control over from the buying side, from the client side.
It's a trust and verification
over
problem, right?
where chips are being produced or being manufactured, right? So,
see, my only point is we have to deal with the Chinese, right? And we have to deal from a position of strength. We have to be very firm and all that. We don't have to give up any of our national interest. But at the same time, talking too much about it, accusing them of putting in backdoors and creating all this ruckus in the media makes the critical discussions tough. See, all said and done, they're not self-destructive. They want their place in the world. And there's going to be a lot of negotiation that will happen. I mean, there's a new world order that is shaping up in the technology thing, right? And China will take its place at the table at a rightful level. You can't deny them that. But India also deserves a place at the table. And so we will fight for our place and do it. I'm not worried about China, right? If there are issues with China, we'll deal with it. I don't want to demonize them. I simply want to say, look, 1.4 billion people should be using at least 70% local chips. That's all.
At least we have.
I have no problem with the Chinese chip. Have a proper audit. Yeah.
At least we have the capability to produce or audit the chips that go into the 70% of the households of the country. Something like that.
Yeah. No. Even the other 30%, let the Chinese follow an audit procedure. Right? Don't keep it opaque.
I mean, negotiating that is going to be difficult, but yeah. So anyway, so towards the last part of the podcast now, and drawing upon this now, like you mentioned, like knee-jerk reactions to supposed Chinese, suzerainty over this kind of critical part of the value chain, semiconductor value chain, means that the US export controls over lithography, over manufacturing equipment and materials, etc., may also probably extend to something like RISC-V. Now, it is very difficult to impose export controls on open source technology. It's and it is unclear how US policymakers that are to avoid that specific.
No, so RISC-V shifted to Switzerland 2-3 years ago just to avoid this, right? So all that's going to happen is American companies will be stopped from contributing to RISC-V.
No, so American
Which
companies.
Is meaningless. What about American
export
companies employees sitting in India?
They don't just regulate the export of goods from technologies from its mainland, but also subsequent re-export alongside its geopolitical allies, etc. like ASML, etc., were forced to toe the line. It includes know-how, data, and blueprints. Now, again, the amount of leaks that can happen through this entire process is tremendous, and which is also why a lot of experts on this area have been saying, okay, we don't know what the current export controls are going to have consequences like, but also it's just probably a fool's endeavor to try and impose export controls on open source technology. So what do you think about,
It's a non-starter. I think it'll die there itself. A lot of the manpower for RISC-V verification is coming from China. If you stop the Chinese, the RISC-V initiative comes to a grinding halt.
or China creates its own fragmented, its own RISC-V architecture interpretation?
No, I don't think it'll be fragmented. There'll still be one RISC-V standard. I mean, the base instruction is like, you can print the base RISC-V instruction on one piece of paper. Most of the RISC-V stuff is done. We're only talking about other extensions and all that. For the embedded space, RISC-V is more than enough. RISC-V anyway allows for you to add extensions and all that, right? Including proprietary extensions. So it's the goal is that you do a proprietary extension, you kind of try it out. Once it stabilizes, then you contribute it back and make it a standard. Correct. So I'm not going to get into the prediction game, but I think the US effort on RISC-V is going to be a non-starter because there's no technically feasible way to achieve that.
Yeah, that's something also I share, because there have been a lot of concern been echoed by some policymakers, but again, the Bureau of Industry and Standards, they aren't really taking it very seriously at this point. But yeah, so this brings us to the end of this episode of Siliconpolitik. Do you have any closing remarks you would like to make on the chip design ecosystem or the value chain?
No, like I said, my fundamental concern is that India is not designing its own products, right? So starting a processor company like InCore is not for the faint of heart. It's one of the toughest companies you can think of. But we did it because not for necessarily nationalistic, patriotic reasons. I mean, that always plays a role. But the fact that it is inherently unfair and unjust to ask 1.4 billion people to survive on technology that's imported. I mean, computing is at the heart of modern society. How can you have a component of a core part of your society that you don't have control over? It's inherently unfair. And so we need our cores, we need our process to build our products. And that is what InCore was formed. Fortunately, we got funded. We're getting there. Now, we just need to use this IP. We're working with partners to create Indian chips. And these are baby steps. And people will say, hey, these are simple chips. We're not even doing the simple chips now, right? The number of designs coming out of India that's being sold in India is zero, right? I mean, there are 2-3 which started, and a lot of them have been acquired by foreign companies. I'm pretty sure I left out 1 or 2 chips. But broadly, we import close to 100%, right? So we really need to have a focus deadline saying 2027, I need 50 to 100 million Indian chips being shipped. Unless we have a fixed concrete goal, nothing is going to happen.
That makes sense. And I would love to keep collaborating on this podcast as and when you develop more in InCore.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, we will be. So I'll keep you on the loop.
Yeah, thank you so much.
We're there.
Thank you so much for taking your time out from your schedule to join us today, Mr. Madhusudan. And to all our listeners, if you're interested in learning more about semiconductor geopolitics, check out the high-tech geopolitics research on takshashila.org.in. And see you all on the next episode of All Things Policy.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.